It's not a very exciting building, is it? Kind of a disused warehouse in the middle of an industrial estate. But inside that building is one of the greatest treasures of bushcraft. This is a real Aladdin's cave. It's the collection centre for the Canadian Canoe Museum in Peterborough. These are the canoes not yet on show. And there are over 500 of them from all over the world, ranging from dugout canoes to pleasure craft from the 1930s. But if there's one type of canoe that epitomises bushcraft above all others, it has to be this type down here. These are birchbark canoes. The hull is made from the skin of the tree itself, spread with a frame of cedar, and the whole thing lashed together with roots. They're icons of bushcraft, and they reflect their manufacturer's intimate and detailed knowledge of the natural world. For me, these are the finest craft people have ever created. And in this programme, I'm going to learn how to make one. The canoe I'd be building follows a traditional design of the Algonquin people, made from birch and cedar. I'd be building it with one of the few people left who knows how to make them, Pinock Smith, who comes from a family of canoe builders. He lives and works on a reservation to the north of Ottawa. Canada is 25% water, and its network of lakes and rivers mean that for thousands of years the canoe was the most important way to get around. Most birchbark canoes built today are showpieces designed for museums. Our boat was to be different. It was going to be a working canoe made using only traditional methods. Pinock, when you're building the canoe, do you work to any dimensions?
No. The canoes are not, it's not exact. I've never seen my uncle or anybody using a tape to measure these things. They just worked with the wood, and if it happened, to be a little thinner one place or it didn't seem to matter at all, and it would work good.
I think that's the lovely thing about all these sorts of projects, is that you have to actually listen to what the wood is telling you and just go with the flow. Very different to modern carpentry.
Quite a bit. This one here, it's very free.
Traditionally, these boats were built quickly. We had just over a week to complete ours, but these are slow and steady procedures. The first task was splitting wood into long strips to make the gunnels. That's the bit that runs along the top of each side of the canoe. In England, there was actually a law until well into the 1900s that said that all government furniture had to be made from riven wood that was split, because it followed the grain, because there were cheap manufacturers cutting across the grain. Typical of bushcraft, the whole process is based on a deep understanding of the properties of the materials we were using.
There it came out. One piece.
It's not bad at all.
It's not too bad.
With each new split, you need to pause, explore, and reassess the wood you're dealing with.
They did it in my garage. Two here.
Ooh. What I'm doing is shaping this piece of wood. I've got to smooth it down and make it to the right dimensions. This needs to be about a finger thick and several fingers wide with a gentle taper, as this is going to form the gunnel of the canoe. To do that, I've used the axe to do the rough shaping out, which is a tool I'm most happy with, but now I'm finishing off using the crook knife which is virtually a unique tool to this part of the world, and it's absolutely ideal for smoothing. It's kind of a cross between a draw knife, a plane and a gouge. These skills were once commonplace, but as I found with so many traditional skills across the world, things are changing.
I remember when I was young, in this area here, canoes, everybody's making canoes. It would have been funny if you didn't know how. It would have been strange you didn't know how to build a canoe 60 years ago here. You know, at least have the knowledge of how it comes together and stuff. And today, even the natives on the reserve would come up to me and say, you know, they're surprised that I built canoes. That's how much of our culture we lost in 50, 60 years. You know, it was... Today, there's some people you meet, as far as they're concerned, a canoe comes from a sporting shop. You know, there's no such thing as going into the bush and...
Make them up yourself. I know you don't use rulers and measures when you make these canoes, but so far we haven't compared any of the pieces at all.
Well, they'll match up together after. Trust.
I admire your confidence. That's generations of canoe making experience speaking. This whole area is alive with the spirit of the canoe. One of the most famous canoeists of modern times came from just down the road. Like me, he wasn't an Indian, but he earned a special place in the history of canoeing. Bill Mason.
It's a feeling of almost euphoria to get out here, and I've got a canoe load of food and I don't have to be back by any set time. And it's just the greatest feeling of freedom I know.
Bill Mason really was the doyen of the open canoe. His enthusiasm that came through all his films and books was simply infectious. He inspired a whole generation, including myself, to go out, pick up a paddle and go out into the wilderness in canoes. Bill Mason died in 1988, but his children are both immersed in the world of the canoe. Daughter Becky divides her time between art and teaching canoeing to a whole new generation.
My dad, he passed on the love of wilderness. Canoeing, yes, it was important, but he didn't force us to go canoeing. So he just said, this is a vehicle. Would you like to come along? And of course, as a kid, you want to come along. We have so many cities, so much concrete, and you don't think about the wilderness very much, or canoeing, or anything much except money and cars and where you're going to go as quickly as possible. And the canoe makes you slow down. And that's why I like that travel, is it makes everything slow down. And then you look more and you learn more. The canoe means beautiful freedom, to be out on a trip for 10 days, just gliding along in the water, camping where you want, and then pitching your tent, using it as a vehicle. And also, I teach canoeing, and I like it. I love the art of paddling.
Becky is at home with all aspects of canoeing, including many traditional techniques passed down from First Nation peoples.
I taught a gentleman, a First Nation person from the James Bay, the Indian stroke, and he went back home. And his grandmother, he was very excited, and he went home and he said, look what I learnt. And she started crying because it was exactly the same as her father or grandfather had taught her. And it's just like a reconnection. And canoeing, you asked me, well, is it going to be here forever? Is it going to evolve? But it's just extraordinary. Canoeing doesn't evolve. It's just here. And we just pass it along.
Sentiments I share entirely. It's a way of travelling that brings you closest to the world of bushcraft. Learning how to make one, I felt I was joining that process of sharing knowledge. Well, there we go. It's the end of the day. To any bystander watching, it might seem that all we've been doing here is creating a mass of shavings. But in fact, we've made 7 different parts for the canoe. We've made both halves of the gunnels, the 2 bits to each side, and we've been making a cap that goes on top of that. We've made 3 of those. Although we'll only need 2, we've made 1 spare just in case we have an accident. And those are the longest pieces of wood we have to prepare for the canoe. And we've done that first, so that if we mess up, we haven't wasted all our wood. The arm's tired now, I can tell you. The fingers from using the crook knife all day, very, very sore. And it'll be good to soak that hand in a cold bath later on. But it's not an unpleasant feeling though. It's a really honest sort of thing to be doing. And working with this wood in the sun here, it's been fantastic, lovely. Occasional sound of the bullfrogs from behind, the odd heron flying overhead. It's been a lovely day. And it's quite exciting. It's one of those jobs when you start, you really don't want to finish, and you have to force yourself to take breaks so that you don't get too tired and make mistakes. Looking forward to tomorrow. When you do things traditionally, that means making the jig you'll use to build the canoe as well as the canoe itself. So more splitting, but with the right materials, it's incredibly straightforward. I've never worked with cedar before. It splits better than any wood that I have worked with, even better than sweet chestnut. And of course the principles for splitting out bits of wood like this and keeping the split running true are universal. It's a lovely wood to work. And as always, the troublesome areas are like this where there's a knot and you just have to take your time, and it's a combination of listening to what the wood wants to do and also telling it what you want it to do. There's a combination of the two. You have to be very determined and persuade it to go where you want it to. So we're past the knot now. The split's starting to run off to one side, so what I'll do is I'll bend the thicker piece more. And to help me do that, I'll put my knees either side, so I've got a fulcrum to work against, like so. And now the split, as you can see, has run back into the middle. If anything, it's gone a fraction too far. I think one of the things that fascinates me about wood is all trees have different personalities, and this wood is it's a gentle wood that needs a little bit of gentle persuasion, but at the same time a very reliable wood. Fabulous. Look at that. Making everything by hand makes sure you extract the maximum value out of every piece of wood. So these pieces we're making into braces.
Yeah, all bracing, all side bracing.
When we've finished using them as braces, I guess we can thin these down and use them within the boat itself?
Yeah, we'll use them for sheeting and stuff. We'll recycle the wood afterwards.
So nothing's wasted. So even the jig and the frame that we are using to build the boat becomes a part of it.
Yeah.
Recycling materials like this is just one more example of how clever this design is. It's no wonder that it was relied on for so long.
The canoe has played a very prominent role in the history of Canada. For 14,000 years, the birchbark canoe was used. The First Nations people needed the birchbark canoe because that's all there was, to ply the waterways to accommodate hunting, fishing, trapping, moving their families, and all of these kinds of essential things. The birchbark canoe was the only thing they had.
The huge impact of the fur trade across the whole of Canada from the 17th century onwards opened up a new demand for birchbark canoes. But even though fur trade canoes were bigger, their design was almost identical.
It's remarkable, the diversity. I think in the Canadian Canoe Museum we have over 80 different birchbark canoes, right up to the great large fur trade canoes, the Canoe de Maitre, 36, 38 feet.
these canoes were the stuff of legends, carrying heavy loads vast distances for months on end. You could almost say the Birchbark canoe built Canada. It was this characteristic ribbed structure that we needed to think about for ours next. No tape measures, remember, so we used a template to mark up where the ribs should go. Whilst that may seem straightforward enough, you need to know what you're doing.
It's really interesting. Although we're very early on in the building stage of the canoe, we're having to make important decisions right now. And the spacing of the ribs determines essentially where the thwarts go. The thwarts are the pieces of wood which spread the canoe above the top. And we have to have enough room that I can actually sit in the canoe and get the load in the canoe.
It was also the time to determine the width of the canoe.
And there's the...
Yep, that's beautiful.
Lay this down, you can take a look at it.
Yeah, let's try the, see how it feels. See how it feels. I'll step in very carefully. Wow, that's interesting. If anything, it feels a little wide, but then again, it's going to have another, what, another 6 inches or so on each end, isn't it?
Yeah, we're going to put the bark will extend a little more.
This was a decision only I could make. After all, I was the one who'd be paddling it. After much consideration, we decided to make the canoe slightly narrower.
That looks good, doesn't it? Well, Pinock, I reckon we go with that width,
Right.
eh?
That'll be a good width.
A little bit of a compromise, a little narrower.
It isn't much though, it's...
But I think if it's too wide, it's awkward to paddle. I think that'll be good. So what do you reckon, about here?
I think it's better in the other spot. It's a little bit more...
Any other way, I
More
thought,
level.
was maybe to go
This
that
end
way.
goes down a bit, but right here...
This goes down a bit here.
Yeah.
But
But
maybe,
that end,
maybe
the
there.
canoe should be starting to rise by then.
We've been searching for a nice piece of level ground, and it's quite a critical decision, because if the ground is twisted, when we build the boat, it'll be twisted too, and that's the last thing we want. What we need is nice level ground, maybe with a small dip in the middle to give us a bit of rocker, which will enable the canoe to turn better. Birchbark really is an amazing material, and it's got unique properties that enable it to be used for this sort of job. If you look at this cedar bark, for example, if I bend that as though we were going to use it for canoe, you can see that the grain runs along the bark and tends to open up and split. With birch bark, the grain goes exactly the other way, which enables you to bend it like so, and it doesn't split open. Fantastic material.
To ensure the canoe takes the right shape, we made a template around which we could fold up the bark. With the template weighted down, we could cut slits to help the bark to fit around the curve of the canoe.
So, Pinock, how did you learn to build canoes yourself?
These are learned from my uncle.
Yeah.
That's, well, I seen canoes when I was young, being built all the time, because my grandfather was building canoes till a very late age, and I used to see him do it, and I see my father build them. But I actually started working with my uncle. Oh, it must be 10, 12 years ago now. Yeah, I just decided to take the summer off. Told my wife I was gonna quit work and build myself a canoe and to do a Bushcraft canoe. And after I started, just never went back to work. You know, just continue to do it. I do it every year and try and make a
So
couple
did you
of-
ask him to build a canoe, or?
No, actually, I ran into him and he didn't have the confidence in me. He asked me if I built one. I said, no, but I seen your father doing it and my father. I said, I got a pretty good idea. He said, oh, you can't build it on your own, so I got to help you. So he was bored, so it was good for him. And it was extra good for me because I got to learn things from him. You know, each person you build with, they show you something new all the time.
Yeah. Are there many people still building these canoes on the reservation?
Not presently. Actually, I'm the only active one right now that's building canoes. There's another community up north here that they're starting to build. There's a few. There's a cousin of mine, he's starting to build the canoes, and there's a few around Golden Lake. There is an interest in it, and there's other people taking it up, and other doing canoes and stuff, so. But there's not that many active ones now.
Who's this little helper? Hello. Hello. You come to help? You come to help?
You know, and so that's just for you and your portage. All the canoes are made like that. I don't know.
Well, it's the end of the third day of construction, and I'm really quite amazed. I didn't think we'd be this far advanced. I can already see the makings of the canoe, especially when you consider that filming the whole process just slows us down. In fact, I'm amazed that people have ever abandoned this method of construction, because making a canoe like this is far quicker and simpler than any other method I've ever seen.
We were building in the garden of one of the most famous birchbark canoe makers ever, William Commander. Now in his 90s, he's well aware of the importance of the birchbark canoe to the Algonquin people and the way they lived traditionally.
We were called nomads, and we were. We could have been gone right at the very edge of tundra up there. We roam all over, then up to California, to Panama, all through there with Birchbark canoe, which was so light. Wherever it gets winter, you pass the winter there. I used to go in the bush. I had the quick knife, the axe. I go out there in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, come out with the canoe. I didn't bring no nails or nothing. You love the canoe. It's your life. And you know, canoe, you could keep a canoe for 100 years.
This morning there's not such a breeze and the mosquitoes are really bad. I'm not kidding, they're drawing blood. So the old birch tree is going to come to the rescue again. We're going to light a small fire to make some smoke to help keep them away. Of course, birch bark is absolutely brilliant for fire lighting. That's the #1 use of the bark in the bush. So you want that split in half again?
Yeah, we'll just split it this way.
That way, yep. So you don't quarter it.
No, then re-split it again.
The canoe is held together with spruce roots, which need to be split first.
Yeah.
It was great to learn from Pinock. I'd used many of these skills before, but not on such a scale. That's where Pinock's knowledge and experience are priceless.
Pinock, I was thinking about what you told me about how you learned to build the canoe. Your grandfather coming along and saying, "Oh, I need to show you how." Just your sense of community here on the reservation is, it's not something that's common in our world anymore.
The elders here are they're very helpful to anybody that wants their help or something, but it's in their nature not to be boastful or anything about it. They're like humble people, and they just keep their knowledge to themselves until you approach them. But as soon as you show that you need their help or something, they're more than happy to help you in any way that they can. Like in my case, when I ran into my uncle, Talking about the canoe, he didn't say that he was the best canoe builder. I think he just said that I needed some help and he'd be happy to help me, and that's how I got started. You know, I just continued to work with him. It was very easy to work with him.
The next job was stitching additional sheets of bark to bring the middle of the canoe up to height. They need to be pegged first.
We'll insert the root into there. No, we don't want our stitches too far apart, so we'll make it about like so.
Like a centimetre between them.
About, yes. And then we take the end of this root.
Yep.
And then we gotta take the other root and shove it back out in the same hole again. Because we're gonna be double stitching it.
Yep.
Put the two together tight, and then we just continue doing that. The whole length is a double stitch on that.
Yeah. There's something really satisfying about this stitching. Although it seems like it's a long job, which it certainly is, I don't think it's tedious, because every stitch you put in, the bark starts to feel more like a canoe. You really feel as though you're making progress. What we've got to do now is make the stem pieces, which is the curved part of the framework of the canoe, which reinforces the bow and the stern. And Pinock's making them, and I'm learning how, because obviously if we had a drastic accident with the canoe, we might have to replace one of these. And as Pinock has told me, if you can't repair it, you shouldn't be paddling it. That's a very good piece of advice, I reckon.
So it was back to the splitting. The end pieces are laminated to make them bend, and it's amazing how effective this is. Tying them off in this way encourages the wood to adopt its new shape. Next it was making the ribs. If the bark is the skin, the ribs are the skeleton of the canoe. I don't think I've ever split so much wood, but we needed about 24 of them. And before we used them, they needed a good soaking to make them flexible. Meanwhile, we carried on with the fitting of the gunnels, which came with a real sense that we were getting somewhere.
Set that there.
Wow. We're getting there. It's a good moment, this.
Now just to determine the height we want to be.
When we take the planking out, we're going to get 2 inches or so extra depth, aren't we?
At least 2, you know, probably at the end it'll be about that height.
About that height. God, it's another critical decision, isn't it? It's all right for you, Pinock. You're not going to have to paddle it. Probably about there somewhere, I reckon. Oh, a fraction higher, maybe. It's a really unnerving moment. I'm purposely resisting the temptation to get a tape measure out and measure a modern canoe. The whole magic of these canoes is that they're made to order. You're in the field, you're making decisions with your eyes and your hands and your body. And but this is the nerve-wracking bit, because if we don't give ourselves enough depth, then the canoe, when it's loaded, will sit too low in the water. If we make it too high, then the gunnel may be so high it's difficult to paddle and it'll catch more wind. So it's a fine line to draw between the two. And it all comes down to the mark we put on this stick.
I don't know if it's good.
There.
Yeah.
I think so too.
Making every cut, every peg, and every decision was a wonderful feeling. I felt connected to all the canoe builders who'd come before. Pinock showed me how the gunnels are stitched to the
Again, we
bark.
try and keep the round side.
The thinking behind every stage of the construction of these craft is so detailed.
Put around. Normally I don't make too many holes down there. I try and go in maybe 3 times in the same hole. That way I don't weaken the bark as much.
Right, yeah.
So
Show me.
say if we get 15 here,
Yep.
we'll have like this particular hole here.
5 holes, 15 lashings.
Yeah. Even if the hole gets big, the water line will never come to that high. Like these canoes are quite buoyant and they stay on top. Now, if your water line's up to here, you got way too much stuff in your canoe.
You're a keen paddler, are you?
No, I don't paddle those things. That's why I would never get my canoe up to there in the water.
To pin it, we're building this canoe with all traditional technology. The crook knife, all hand tools. There are people who cheat, aren't there?
Yeah, you can use a drill to make these holes, you know. And the only difference is that with the drill, you're actually removing the fibers of the bark. Whereas with the awl, you're just separating it. And the bark tends to want to close up on itself afterwards. The bark wants to heal itself up, so it's better to use an awl than to drill out the section.
Just think, bringing a power tool to a project like this completely transforms the whole process, and you might as well be making a modern canoe. To me, the part of the magic of this is that if we didn't have a metal oar, we could be using the leg bone from a deer or a caribou. Yeah.
We used ash, a strong durable wood, to make the thwarts. They're the bits that span the canoe and hold it apart.
This bark's not coming off too easy, it's not too bad, but the board's been lying around for a little while, so it's drying out. So I'm going to make a tool to help me get that off, called a spud.
One of the things I love about bushcraft is that whatever tool you need, you have the skills to make it.
And off comes the bark. Like that.
By the middle of the next day, Pinock, workhorse that he is, had pretty much finished the stitching. And I was making good progress with the main thwart. That's the one that goes across the middle of the canoe, right in front of where I'd be sitting. It needs a little bit more shaping than the others.
I need to get this right because it's this piece of wood more than any other on the canoe that I'll be looking at while I'm paddling. But it's really lovely when you make things with your own hands. You make all the decisions yourself. And here, for example, the piece of ash I'm choosing has this nice two-tone effect. Rather like that. Not sure that will show when the canoe's aged, but I'll know it's there. It's also nice to use the crooked knife. It's a wonderful tool. It gives you a really good clean finish, because as you shave with it you can see the effect you're getting straight away. But I have to say, I'm not used to using this tool, and now I'm waking up in the mornings with my hands literally on fire with aches.
But my hands were about to get an unexpected break.
Well, I tell you what, I'm staying well under cover. So somewhere up there, according to local tradition, the Thunderbird. Wherever the Thunderbird looks, there's lightning. And that thunder, that's the beating of its wings. Well, I don't know. Midsummer, look at the size of those hailstones. That was really some storm. Absolutely terrific. I love it though. I think storms like that, incredibly exciting to be out in. Wonderful. And in some strange way that storm and the experience will be part of the memories I associate with this canoe. All part of the canoe's birthing.
Within minutes we were dry again, but in spite of the rain, as we removed the planking from the canoe, we began to see that all the sun over the last few days had begun to damage our work. And that's exactly the moment William chose to visit our build for the first time.
Give it time. So how we doing, William? What do you reckon?
I think you're doing all right, but you're going to be some job to put it straight here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where the sun has been on it, isn't it?
That's hot water.
Yeah.
This is not too bad, this side, eh?
Yeah, that looks
That was in the
When
shade
the
of
sun
it.
don't hit it.
Yeah.
The sun makes it bad, eh?
Whatever the condition of our bark, we still needed to press on by preparing the ribs. To do this, you douse them with hot water, which makes them very flexible relatively quickly. Wherever you need strength in the boat, it's achieved by using the natural qualities of the wood itself. When these craft were used in earnest by Pinock's forebears, it was the ribs that were one of the most common parts to need running repairs.
Occasionally they would break a rib sometimes. And
Break a rib, not the bark.
the bark wouldn't break. The quality of the bark was so good that you'd hit a rock. They didn't do any portaging much. They ran a lot of rapids and stuff, and occasionally hit a rock. And it wouldn't break the bark at all. It's the ribs on the interior that would break. But they could continue on your voyage with a broken rib. Then you just replace it.
We were still on schedule, just. Miraculously, the ribs were all in. Now it was time to number them so I could take them out to cut them down to the correct length.
Well, the boat is really now starting to take shape. You can see that it's a canoe. As the ribs go in, the hull shape is really beginning to form. But I'm not relaxed yet because there's still a long way to go. And you can see here where the sunlight has really curled this bark up. That's a bit of a problem. We need to do something about that. Push that down a bit. And Yeah, there's the odd crack hole here. I'm still unconvinced it's going to be seaworthy, so still a lot of work to do. I tell you, you know, one minute you feel good about it, the next minute you see a problem, and it's quite an interesting experience.
It seemed a long time since we'd started, even though it was only a few days. But if we were going to finish, our work days were going to have to get longer and longer.
We're really pulling the stops out to get this done. We've been joking because up here, you know, if you walk on snowshoes and you get aches and pains from walking on snowshoes, there's this French phrase for it called mal de raquette. And we've been joking about mal de couteau croche. And that's the pain that comes from the crooked knife, because both of our hands, we're waking up in the morning feeling like our hands are 4 times the size they actually are. How's the mal de couteau croche?
So, this is that's what we're feeling.
But we had no choice. We had just a couple of days left, and we were both determined to get it on the water. The work had to continue.
It's like filleting a canoe. I think this is my favourite part of the canoe. It's so ingenious, the way the wood is laminated and then bent up to form the front of the canoe. And the little man then sits there, and then the gunwale sits on there holding the weight. So you can see how the shape of the bow and the stern is formed by these 2 pieces of wood.
With a construction like this, the pieces don't necessarily fit first time. It's trial and error, all done by hand and eye.
And then taper the back. That's good.
Yeah, fitted nicely, that one. Yeah. That's gone in easy. Yeah, that's a nice fit though. That's snug, isn't it? That's really, that's looking great. Tell you what though, it would be just about impossible to learn this from a book.
You'd have an awful thick book to begin with.
But there's so many little details and nuances and experience that come into play.
Yeah, it's a lot of, like we just did there, you know, fitting first, take it back out. There's no pre-measurement. I couldn't tell you, make this piece a certain width, certain height, because each canoe is different. There's no, every canoe is individual. You don't have all the same parts in it. I couldn't sell you a kit that says this is going to work. No. Because when you put it together, it's not going to work.
Because the bark, you can't predict how that's going to behave either.
The rise, you know, and the way it's going to play and stuff like that. So it's quite difficult, I think, to follow directions and now to make one that's better.
Very much so, yeah.
Hands-on is the best way.
That's another thing I love about bushcraft. It's all hands-on. Pinock showed me how each of the ribs needed tapering slightly differently. No 2 parts of this canoe are the same.
Might just chamfer that.
As I carved the end of each rib, I realised that I'd know the ins and outs of this canoe more intimately than any canoe I'd ever paddled before. But before the ribs could be finally fitted, we needed to take a closer look at our bark.
Look at this. I'm not so keen on that, Pinock. What do you think?
We dried it out too much.
But this is actually getting worse as we watch it. I mean, these are getting bigger by the minute. This is the side that's been in the sun while we've been building it. It started to crack quite badly, and some of the cracks are now spreading across the boat, and I'm very, very concerned about that. I'm really starting to have some doubts about the integrity of the hull, and yeah, we're going to have to take it into the shade and have to make it very wet. That's all I can think of at the moment. And then it's over to you.
Right now there's only bark there. And it's flimsy, but once you get the cedar in there and the ribs are in there
It'll
very
give it
tight,
strength, yeah.
That's going to give us a lot of extra strength, and then we'll gum it. It's going to all seal up.
Okay.
But I know your concerns. You know,
Yeah,
it's,
well, you know.
looking at it like this, sir, I wouldn't get into it either, you know.
No.
The solution was to patch the cracks with an extra lining of bark. But our problems weren't just down to the sun. It's getting harder and harder to find the right sort of bark. That's thick with the strength and flexibility of rubber.
Today it's very difficult to find trees that have these qualities because most of the trees, most of them have been cut. A lot of them have been cut.
They've not been cut by canoe builders, they've been cut by loggers.
Loggers, yeah. They go for veneer, which is the #1 quality tree. And what they leave is all the other trees that are crooked and stuff like that. So it's very difficult if you go into a place where they've already cut to find these nice trees.
Oh yeah.
Luckily, this was the moment William chose to visit us again.
Yeah, we've got a few problems we could do with your expert eye on. This is the one that scares me though.
That one
Because
there.
a good slap
Yeah.
between two waves, that could just snap.
With his vast experience, he was able to offer us some simple advice on how to add our extra layer of bark for strength.
All you have to do is extend it. Not even a thick bark, just a thin one. Contrary side this way. You could put the gum inside.
Yeah, William was saying we put the bark counter. You see this one running this way?
Yeah.
The other layer we put
Give
it
the strength the other way.
the other way.
That's a good idea. William, would you have used this bark in the old days?
I don't think so. That the old people would say they threw that away. But today you have to have that.
Cross grain, yeah.
Let's go ahead.
Yep.
On top of the problems with the bark, we were running out of time. Evening was fast approaching, and with only one more day to go, we still had the final fitting of the ribs to do. Not a job you can rush.
Between the bark and the ribs, we place sheeting like this, which is also split cedar. You can see how thin that is, but to give you an idea just how thin, we shape the ends here with a pair of scissors, like so. It's amazing, but once of course this is all combined all together with the bark and the ribs, it gives immense strength, yet retains flexibility.
My pants are stretching or I'm losing weight.
I don't know about you, I need new hands. Oh, you need new knees as well.
New knees, new hands, all new. I'll order a new body.
I've met some wonderful people in my work, but I don't think I have ever worked with anyone as dedicated, reliable and determined as Pinock. He's that rare breed that's true to his word, no matter what the cost.
Well, it was a very late night last night. We worked right into the dark, and the reason for that is we have to finish this boat today, and you can't just put the ribs in one go. What you have to do is ease them in gently, bit at a time, allowing the bark to actually stretch to their form. When these ribs go in, they're extremely tight, And so gradually now through the day we have to tap them in until they're flat and flush against the sheeting inside.
We had to tap the ribs in, finish the bow, add the gum and resin. But some of the ribs had been damaged getting them to fit in the dark, and they needed replacing. Just one more thing to squeeze into an already packed schedule.
Okay, right. Better, isn't it? Give it a good...
It's right there.
Go on, going in. It's hard work though. I love moments like this, don't you? You know, someone read this in a book and said, then you just tap the ribs in.
That's all. That's a great invention you made.
It's not bad, is it?
Still, little by little, bit by bit, we had to make progress. The whole thing was really taking its toll by now.
I'll tell you one thing. I'm used to using hand tools and things. I've got no blisters, but both of us, Pinock and myself, have now got so many little cuts and scratches on our fingertips that we can barely hold anything properly. Is that right?
That's the way I feel. Exactly.
Oh, they're going nice, haven't they? Even though we're up against the clock, we're still wanting it to be just right. I actually think that that willingness to push for perfection is a really important part of bushcraft, because you know, sometimes if you're in a blizzard and you've got to make a fire or build a shelter, if you take shortcuts, things don't work. It's that dedication to getting it right that makes all the difference. Wow, that's supposed to be the hardest one to put in, and it went in just sweet. Well, all the ribs are in. Now, look at that. That pivots there, and you can spin it. That's what we call rocker, and that enables this boat to turn beautifully in the water. Pinock, you're a very clever man. It's beautiful, absolutely staggering, but it's not yet finished. What we've got to do now is put spruce pitch on the sides to keep the water out, and then we can paddle it. Let's do it. Let's go for it.
The pitch is made from resin with bear fat added to make it less brittle.
Uncle, don't. Get one over. Get this one over. This one's okay. We didn't close it quite tight enough.
The final steps, like a great artist finishing a painting.
Smells of the forest. That's what's nice about the pine pitch here, is it? It's pine resin mixed with fat. It smells absolutely of the forest. It's beautiful. Of course, what's really interesting about these materials is that, you know, to repair your canoe, you don't have to carry a box full of epoxy or anything like that with you. You just go to the forest and collect some resin from a tree, weeping naturally from it. Brilliant. But what I can't understand is you're not really a paddler of canoes, and yet you've become interested and very expert in the manufacture of these traditional craft. What made you do it?
I don't know, I think it was just time that I did to get to make a canoe. I felt it was very important for it's part of my culture, and I'm proud of that part because it's my ancestors that first made these canoes, and the simplicity and how they became to use these particular materials makes me very proud of my culture, and that's who I am, you know. So that's why I enjoy doing it. Even though the quality of bark is not the same, and my canoes, you know, is not as sturdy as I would like them to be, I still like the canoes, you know. It's just something I like doing because it is part of my culture, and it makes me
I'll tell you what, the
proud of who I am.
Will be when we put it on the water shortly.
No, it won't be long now. We'll just A little bit more gumming around.
At last, time to put it in the water. Our first chance to see if all the aches, sweat and sore hands had been worth it.
Okay, I've got it. So far, so good. She floats.
It's a good sign.
Shall I take it for a spin?
Why don't? Please do.
The moment of truth. Beneath me, the wood, bark and roots were finally transformed into a living vessel.
Turns on a penny.
That was all right.
Fantastic.
Looks good.
Fantastic. It's amazing, the boat's fantastic. It handles extremely well, better than you can imagine. It's been very frustrating to sit on shore with all this water that's just begging to be paddled upon with only a pile of bark and sticks. At last, to see it all come together is just fantastic. It's a wonderful feeling. And of course the boat means freedom. Freedom not just for your body, but for your mind and your spirit and everything.
Pinock may not enjoy paddling, but I was determined that he should share the incredible satisfaction.
Oh, this is nice.
She goes, doesn't she?
Looks good. Someone tell me how great it feels to have an Englishman paddling me around for a change.
It had taken 9 days. 9 days of constant splitting, carving and stitching. 9 days of nerve-wracking decisions, aching hands and dealing with problem after problem. 9 days that will stay with me for the rest of my life. Birchbark canoes are the finest craft people have ever made. It's been a lifelong ambition of mine to make one. Thanks to Pinock, I'd finally done it. And in the process, gained an even deeper respect for the people who invented this incredible craft.